In the summer of 2025, an otherwise ordinary patrol routine exploded into an international story. Indian Coast Guard crews watching a 3 nautical-mile exclusion zone around a tiny speck of green spotted a small craft drifting where no vessel should be. The men on deck first thought it might be a lost fisherman. Then an officer radioed. The passenger was foreign, a tourist from the United States, and his boat was heading straight for a shoreline that the world has been ordered to avoid. The interception was methodical and urgent. The exclusion zone around North Sentinel Island is not ceremonial. It is enforced. Patrols close in, orders bark over the radio, spotlights slice through spray. Within minutes, the tourist craft is surrounded, boarded, and its occupants secured in handcuffs. The immediate facts are simple. He is alive. He is detained. He will face charges for violating the protected zone. But why would anyone risk this? What was he trying to touch? This is North Sentinel, a place barely 23 square miles in size but enormous in consequence. It lies tucked inside India's Andaman Islands, ringed by reef and surf and a government-imposed bubble of law intended to keep people away. Inside those trees is a people the modern world has almost no record of, the Sentinelese. They live without outside medicine, modern infrastructure, or a recorded written language. For them, contact with outsiders is a threat that must be met with force. History shows they will not hesitate. The story of contact with North Sentinel is a slow, brutal lesson in cause and consequence. In the late 1800s, colonial expeditions arrived with ideas of study and civilizing. British sailors took captives, intending to examine and display them. Those captives, exposed to pathogens the islanders had never encountered, became sick and sometimes died. Survivors returned to the island changed and terrified. The memory of disease and kidnapping hardened into defiance. From then on, the island's response would be unmistakable. Throughout the 20th century, India's administrators and visiting scientists tried other approaches. Gift diplomacy, careful observation, and slow, respectful withdrawal when aggression flared. They learned to read the line between curiosity and threat. A coconut offered at distance might be accepted. A boat that drifted too close would be met with spears. Video and notes from those moments show men stepping from the trees, painted bodies taut, bows raised. Those images are reminders. The Sentinelese have the agency to say no, and they mean it. Nature itself has tested the Sentinelese. The 2004 tsunami, one of the deadliest natural disasters in recorded history, scoured coastlines across the Indian Ocean. When helicopters hovered above North Sentinel to check for survivors, an islander drew his bow and fired at the aircraft. The message was raw and simple. We survived the sea, do not come. That incident confirmed what decades of contact attempts had shown. Outside calamity does not dilute the tribe's resolve. Human error has been costlier. In 2006, 2 Indian fishermen illegally harvested crabs near the restricted zone. Their anchor line broke in the night. The current carried them ashore. They walked into a world that refused outsiders with lethal speed. The Sentinelese responded with projectiles and spears. Both men were killed. When authorities attempted recovery, arrows shot upward, forcing pilots to withdraw. Those bodies remain on the sand to this day, an unambiguous border marker between curiosity and consequence. Then in 2018, the world watched a modern tragedy unfold. John Allen Chow, an American missionary, had spent years preparing to reach the island. He paid fishermen to ferry him close, wrote in a diary about conversion and sacrifice, and slipped ashore. Chow's attempts were intentional, driven by faith, but his faith collided with a culture that had no framework for it. Arrows struck. He died. His body was taken by the tribe. His handlers were arrested. The global reaction was instant and polarized. Some called him a martyr, others condemned him as recklessly arrogant. Whatever the judgment, the outcome was the same. The island answered violence for invasion. That is why the Indian government's policy is deliberate and strict. A 3-nautical-mile buffer, enforced by the Coast Guard and the law. Visit the island and you risk arrest and prosecution. But the policy is not mere bureaucratic protectionism. It is a form of conservation. There is a fragile biology beneath the cultural boundary: disease. The Sentinelese, isolated for millennia, have no immunity to common modern illnesses. A single exposure, a cough, a cold, a case of influenza, could spread through a small population with catastrophic speed. To preserve their lives, India has chosen separation as protection. Imagine a flu entering a population of 100 people who've never seen that pathogen. Without herd immunity, mortality rates could reach numbers that are unthinkable. It's not hypothetical projection for scholars. Global history is littered with examples where isolated groups collapsed under introduced disease. The law that keeps people off North Sentinel is, in cold terms, a public health measure for one of humanity's last isolated branches. But the modern threat is twofold. There's the physical danger of an arrow, and there's the digital danger, attention. The internet rewards spectacle and novelty. Channels chasing virality send smaller tolls to ethical judgment. For some, the idea of stepping onto forbidden sand becomes not a moral question, but a content strategy. I'll get one shot, they think. I'll film it. I'll post it. I'll be famous. On North Sentinel, fame ends at the beach. The tribe's boundary is not a font. It is bone and blade. Anthropologists caution against romanticizing the Sentinelese. They are not human relics to be gawked at. They are people. Their language is unclassified. Linguists lack a reliable corpus. Their genome has not been publicly sampled for good reason. Sampling would require contact that could kill them. Estimates of their numbers vary widely because observation is risky and limited. 50, 200. No count is confident. What is known is behavioral. They move in small bands, fish from simple canoes, make temporary camps and hunt with bows. They fashion stone and wooden tools. Their social structure is opaque, but enough evidence suggests tight kinship ties, territorial cohesion, and an embedded cultural memory that repels outsiders. The moral questions pile up. Should the modern world force contact in the name of knowledge? Many say no. Ethically, the principle of non-interference has traction. Let autonomous communities define their destiny. Legally, the state of India has codified that stance into protective law. But complex issues remain. What happens when an islander falls ill? What if a patrol ship capsizes and a survivor washes ashore injured? The official policy has sometimes been to observe from a distance and intervene only when absolutely necessary. That restraint is not cowardice. For a small, isolated population, any intervention risks annihilation. Back in 2025, the detained tourist would later tell investigators he had an agenda. Some combination of curiosity and a narrative he wanted to film, perhaps a missionary edge, perhaps just a viral ambition. His exact motives would become part of the court record. For many viewers, motive matters less than result. The Coast Guard's prompt response avoided another headline in blood. They read him his rights. They photographed the boat. They impounded the vessel's equipment. They issued warnings designed to be deterrents. The tourist would face charges, and the case would be a cautionary story for would-be intruders. Public reaction is predictably fractious. Some voices scream for open access, argue that no place should be off-limits to curiosity or witness. Others demand absolute protection, calling the island a sanctuary that must remain inviolate. Legal scholars weigh in on sovereignty, indigenous rights organizations argue about consent and protection, and ethicists warn against paternalistic impulses that can mask violent intentions. The conversation is useful, but often detached from the most immediate fact. The Sentinelese have the right to be left alone, and the rules keep them alive. The Indian approach resembles other nations' policies toward uncontacted peoples. In parts of South America, entire departments exist to monitor and protect isolated tribes. The United Nations has best practice guidelines recommending a presumption of non-contact to preserve health and culture. The global consensus leans toward respect and distance, not conquest or spectacle. That consensus is born of painful history. Contact too often means catastrophe for indigenous groups. Return to the island's shoreline, and the echoes lengthen. The fishermen's deaths were not anomalies. They were consequences of a clear boundary. The island's defenders show no malice beyond defense. Their aim is survival. From inside the trees, they see the ocean and have learned that the things that come from it, boats, clothing, strange metal, have never brought them anything but disease and grief. That memory is living law to them. John Chow's diary entries reveal the collision between conviction and consequence. He wrote of purpose and sacrifice, of believing himself called to deliver scripture. But his belief did not translate into consent from the people he tried to reach. His death triggered moral reckonings across churches, newsrooms, and policy circles. Missionary zeal cannot erase the ethical cost of imposing contact on unconsenting people. Chow's story is part cautionary tale, part cultural argument. The modern impulse to save can often produce irreversible harm. The coastal communities near North Sentinel have their own perspectives. For them, the exclusion zone is a necessary buffer. They tell stories of danger and respect, of lives lost and boundaries that must be honored. Some fishermen are tempted by the black market gains of smuggling tourists or thrill seekers to forbidden reefs. Others refuse. They know what it costs. Local enforcement depends on intelligence, patrolling, and sometimes sheer luck. The Coast Guard's presence is a fragile guarantee, not an impenetrable shield. From a medical standpoint, the risk is stark. Epidemiologists explain that a naive population exposed to a novel pathogen faces a high basic reproduction number and extremely limited capacity to mount a response. An outbreak could spread faster than any intervention could be mounted. Vaccination is not an option without contact, and contact is the vector that would cause the disaster. It's a paradox with lethal stakes. The act that could save many would require the contact that kills them. Thus, the only viable preservation strategy is separation. Still, misperception persists. Click-driven culture glamorizes the forbidden. Amateur explorers film themselves approaching protected places on drones and boats, baiting reaction for views. The law is clear, but enforcement in remote coastal zones is expensive and inconsistent. The tourist in 2025 gambled and lost. His arrest stands as public evidence that the protections can and will be enforced. But experts warn that enforcement alone cannot remove the temptation that millions of clicks create. So what remains? The island endures because a line is respected. The Sentinelese remain because the world occasionally remembers restraint. Their silence is not an absence, it is a choice. And it is the last refuge of a living culture that has resisted assimilation. There's a haunting dignity in that refusal, to exist on their own terms amid a planet that relentlessly wants to catalog, commodify, and convert. The 2025 arrest should be a warning. It is a modern footnote in a much older story about what it means to be human, and what it costs when one group insists another must be saved. North Sentinel is not a stage for spectacle. It is a home. It is a living archive of human diversity that the world is morally and legally obligated to protect. In the end, the island's rule is simple and unforgiving. Stay out. Respect their boundary. The consequences are real and final. Death for the reckless, potential extinction for the unprotected. Let the Sentinelese be. The last thing they need is the world's help arriving in a coffin.